On the evening of January 30th, 2000, Ray Lewis was looking to party and he had flown to Atlanta to watch Super Bowl 34 and booked himself into the Georgian Hotel. He'd also brought along his personal driver, Dwayne Fassett, to chauffeur a stretch Lincoln Navigator that was 37 feet long with 14 seats and about $3,000 a day. On this night, Ray Lewis dressed to impress with a white and black suit, full-length black mink coat, and what would later be described as enough rock to break the bank. After the Super Bowl game was over, Ray and his crew arrived around 1 a.m. to the Cobalt Club in Atlanta's Party Haven, Buckhead district. The Cobalt had a blue neon glow and a VIP room where Tony Gonzalez and Michael Jordan had been earlier in the week, but Ray held up on the first floor so he could hang out with everyone. With him were Joseph Sweeting, a strip club promoter who'd been friends with him since college, and Reggie Oakley, who'd recently worked his way into his circle through friends of friends. Before the Super Bowl, Ray made an appearance at Sports Authority in Gwinnett County, north of the city, and while Ray was signing autographs, Sweeting and Oakley and a third member of his entourage purchased knives. And later on in the investigation, it was discovered that the signature on the receipt was identified as Ray Lewis. Ray and Sweeting didn't attend the Super Bowl, but Oakley did, and afterwards they all joined back up. Smooth was how Ray would later describe his mood at Cobalt. He had had 4 Remy Martin cognacs while chilling in the attention of half-dressed women and an ever-expanding entourage. He was 24 years old and had a 4-year contract worth $26 million at the time, and he had just dropped more than $100,000 shopping. The necklace he was wearing was gold-studded with diamonds. Ray and his crew avoided the traditional sectioned-off VIP section. Instead, they were posted up near the front door and mingling with the 400-person crowd. Ray, wearing a fur coat and a $45,000 necklace, had paid the doorman to let him and his people inside, and they were enjoying the party just like everyone else, or so it seemed. All that jewelry plus his mink coat, he must have been wearing about $250,000. This was how he rolled. He and his boys said when you come from nothing like he did and step into all that money like he did, you're bound to strut a little bit. Now, somewhere around 3:30 a.m., a good 5 hours after the game had ended, Ray and his group, a total of 6 men and 4 women, began walking toward East Paces Ferry to get back in the Lincoln Navigator limo. And that's when everything went south. A group of men from Akron, Ohio, including 2 men named Richard Lawler and Jackeenth Baker, began arguing with members of Ray's group. As the situation grew more heated, Ray said he shoved Oakley into the limo, attempting to defuse the situation, but Oakley leaped out of the limo, and that's when everything exploded. Baker smashed a champagne bottle over Oakley's head, which is one of the few elements of the night that all parties agree on, and ultimately chaos erupted. All hell broke loose at that point. Everybody was throwing fists, and everybody was punching. Everyone, that is, except Ray Lewis, who testified that while all this was going on, he calmly rested against his limo, watching as his friend Sweeting was dragged and assaulted by 2 huge men. Ray testified that he doesn't fight, period. Some witnesses said 2 men dragged Sweeting to the ground and began beating him, while others said that they saw Oakley chase Baker down. Then, Ray and the rest of the men piled back into the limo, which wheeled off as one of the victim's friends began firing a gun at the vehicle while it sped away. Ray apparently wasn't so calm though. 2 young men collapsed in the street, were covered in blood. Ray took control of the situation and yelled at everybody just shut the F up, and that this isn't going to come back on anybody but him. Meanwhile, those 2 young men lay dying in the street. Richard Lawler, who was 24, and Jackeenth Baker, who was 21. At some point along this drive, the limo stopped at a still unidentified fast food location, and an individual got out of the car and dumped a bag. One witness called it a hotel laundry bag and another a brown paper bag in a trash bin. Prosecutors would later contend that this bag contained Ray's clothes, presumably his suit, which has never been located. Back at the scene, both Lawler and Baker lay dead. Investigators found a small folding knife near the bodies, and that knife was traced back to the Sports Authority in Gwinnett. The limo, with its tire flattened by the gunshot, raced away from the scene but didn't return to Ray's hotel, the Georgian, and instead they went to the Holiday Inn Express where Sweeting was staying, and then Ray took a cab back to the Georgian. Lawler suffered 5 stab wounds to the heart, 1 to the chest and 2 to the abdomen. Baker was also stabbed directly in the heart and in the liver. Both died before they made it to the hospital, and his face was beaten so badly that he had a closed casket at his funeral where the men were buried in Akron, just 24 miles from the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. Now, it didn't take long for police to find the limo shot up with bullet holes and blood in the interior. It sat just a mile from the crime scene, and when cops walked into the lobby, they found Ray's driver, Dwayne Fassett, trembling and chain-smoking. Fassett told police he'd seen Sweeting, Oakley, and Ray all fighting and provided details that only an eyewitness could know. He said he'd heard Oakley boast, "I stabbed mine," and Sweeting reply, "I stabbed mine too." When police got to Ray's room, they found blood there also, but not Ray, who had fled to his fiancee's family's home. When cops arrived to question Ray, he wasn't very helpful, and it took less than a day to obtain an arrest warrant. When police came to take Ray in, he cried, and even more so when he arrived to jail. Ray said he wept when his 5-year-old son asked him why Daddy was always on TV wearing chains, and wept himself to sleep some nights on that nasty bed in that nasty cell where it took 15 days for his lawyer to get him out. Sweeting and Oakley were advised to turn themselves in, which they did, and while Ravens owner Art Modell called around for defense attorneys, cops were learning more about Ray's activities that night. His cell phone was unusually active right after Baker and Lawler were killed. Several eyewitnesses saw people exiting that limo with a laundry bag that they threw in the dumpster, but the cops would never find the clothes Ray wore that night. Not even the mink coat. Nor would they find the photo taken of his group, which had already been burned. A few hours after the murders, at about 6 a.m., Ray called Jessica Robertson, who was not his pregnant fiancée at the time, but his date that night, and asked her to go to the Georgian and pack everything up he had left behind. A jailhouse informant told cops that Ray was using one of his sisters to relay messages to Sweeting, telling him not to worry and that Ray would never betray him. Ray felt he had little to worry about, and the Ravens were standing firmly behind him. His own private investigators beat the cops to just about every witness in the limo, and they all lawyered up. His driver, Fassett, even became increasingly unsure of what went down that night. The trial began on May 15, 2000, and quickly fell apart. The state's star witness, Fassett, recanted much of what he had told police and swore he'd never seen Ray strike anyone. By the trial's second week, Ray wasn't even attempting to appear worried. He sat at the defense table signing autographs over and over. Then, finally, on June 4th, Ray's attorney and the prosecution cut a deal. Ray would testify against Sweeting and Oakley in exchange for 1 year's probation on obstruction of justice. He testified that he saw Oakley fighting in the street and that Sweeting had told Ray he had been punching with the same hand that cupped a knife. And this was another miscalculation by the prosecutors. On June 13, 2000, the jury acquitted both men on charges of murder and assault. They spent only about 5 hours deliberating. Ray Lewis's career never took a hit, even as he spent years remaining defiant about what actually went down. The real truth is, this was never about those 2 kids that were dead in the street. He said it's about Ray Lewis, and don't be mad at him because he was on center stage. Now, the victim's family saw it differently, bringing civil lawsuits against him, which he settled out of court with confidentiality agreements attached to both. Richard's fiancée, who gave birth to his daughter 1 month after the slayings, received $4 million from Ray, which was far more than the $1 million that was estimated. One of the victim's moms didn't even have the energy to fight herself in court and was too grief-stricken to even attend his funeral, and she didn't even acknowledge or accept the fact that her son was gone until a few years later. As far as Ray is concerned, she believes he bears guilt for what happened that night, but that the answer to why, no one will ever know. Nothing was going to stop his career, and she was right. He was eligible for the Hall of Fame after his career and was selected as a first ballot Hall of Famer in February of 2008. He was eventually hired by ESPN as a studio analyst, and all these years later, Ray Lewis holds no regrets about what happened that night in Atlanta. He said if he had to go through it all over again, he wouldn't change a thing, and the end result is who he is now. Thanks for watching.